A good indicator that a business is being run professionally is if they issue employment contracts to their employees. It takes a mature business to realize the value of an employment contract and use it to make its legal systems easier to run. But the employment contract leads to so many misconceptions, both on the employers and the employee side. Isn't that right, Attorney Ramon?
Yes, and one of the most common questions that we get on our site is a variation of, let's say, attorney, my employer didn't issue me an employment contract and I immediately resign. So we get a lot of that. Or on the side of the employer, they ask, attorney, I want to terminate an employee. I didn't issue him an employment contract and I just remove him now. So those are the usual stuff. Now, if you've been wondering about the same things because of a lack of employment contract, stay tuned. This video was brought to you by How to Draft a Probationary Contract, an online workshop that teaches owners, managers, and supervisors how to create the most important contract during recruitment. This course covers the key features and clauses you need to include, as well as tips and best practices to make your life as a recruiting officer easier. Draft your next probationary contract in minutes. Go to info.legalguide.ph/probationary to learn more. Welcome to Legal Guide Philippines, where we simplify the law to help you make better choices. I'm Attorney Ramon Ramirez, and I'm with my partner,
Attorney Erwin Zagala.
So, today we are talking about employment contracts. So, Attorney Erwin, what are these questions that people usually ask?
Well, the first and foremost question that we usually get is it required to become an employee? Diba? Parang, okay. Attorney Ramon and Attorney Erwin, kung wala bang kontrata, hindi ako empleyado. Parang napaka, needy ng dating. But,
kailangan may papel.
Kailangan may papel. Pag wala pa yung papel, hindi ako totoo. Kasapi ng grupong to. Yan. So, I wanted to clear that up as the first point. Now, for the sake of our discussion this episode, we will include or lump together probationary contracts for the new hires and employment contracts for the regular ones. Kasi, pag pinag-usapan ng employment contract, kasama lahat yun. Okay? So, ito na, ang sagot.
What's the answer?
Is a contract required to be considered an employee? And the answer is no. Hindi po yung papel ang pinagbabasihan. So, kung kunwari, from a legal standpoint, you wanted to see, is there really an employer-employee relationship between two people? The boss and the employee. Hindi po tinatanong, may papel ba? But assuming na may papel, that's a very good indicator na di ba, na may employer-employee relationship. Right. But from a legal standpoint, actually, if there was a dole inspector looking at your business, or there was a lawyer looking at a relationship, we won't immediately look at the contract. Assuming na wala, we conclude na hindi ka na empleyado. No, we don't do that. We defer to a more reliable test, and that's what we call the fourfold test. The what?
The fourfold test.
Okay. Well, now what does the fourfold test tell us? The fourfold test includes 4 things that you should ask, and if present itong mga bagay na to, then more than likely it will be considered an employer-employee relationship between two people.
Okay.
So, what's the first indicator na tinitignan? So, Attorney Ramon, role play tayo na konti.
Yes.
Kunwari, ikaw yung amo, and then may tao na tinitignan natin ini-examine ko kung ikaw talaga yung employer niya. Anong gusto mo ibigay na pangalan?
Boyet.
Si Boyet.
Yan,
okay.
Boyet.
So, the first indicator under the fourfold test is the power to hire.
Okay.
So, tatanungin kita, Boss Ramon.
Yes.
Ikaw ba ang nag-hire kay Boyet?
Opo.
Okay. So, medyo may check mark na yun. Okay? So, basically, kung sino yung pumili, kung sino yung nag-engage dun sa tao, yun yung tinitignan ko.
Can I say na yung HR, hindi ako.
But the HR is basically working for the company. So, basically, it's still the company that hired.
So, pabawal pilosopo, guys, ha?
Okay. So, let's go to the second indicator.
All right.
And the second indicator is who pays the salary. Okay, so Boss Ramon, sino nagbabayad ng sweldo ni Boyet?
Si accounting. Si HR, ulit.
Okay, so again, balik ako, hindi pwedeng pilosopuhin to. Because HR and accounting, they are working on behalf of the company. So basically, it's still
or the
company,
business.
Or the business. Okay, so is it safe to say the company, or you, kunwari, single prop.
Okay.
Di ba? You are the one paying for Boyet.
Sige na nga, yes.
Boyet service. Yan.
Alright,
okay, sige. Now, the third indicator is the power to control. So sino pwede mag-utos kay Boyet? Boyet, ganito ang gawin mo. Ito yung quota dyan. Ganito dapat gawin yung trabaho niyan. Sino yun?
Misis niya. Or supervisor niya.
Siyempre sa misis, absolute control yun. Pero in work setting.
Okay, in work setting. Supervisor niya.
Supervisor. Who is working or acting on behalf of?
The business.
The business. So, basically, it's still the business who calls the shots and is able to issue commands and to control Boyet's actions at work. Correct?
Okay, correct.
So, ano na yung nadaanan natin? Power to hire, pay, control. And finally, the fourth one is, who has the power to fire or dismiss Boyet? Kung sakali may sabit or may maling ginawa.
Again, ako. Or yung supervisor.
Okay,
or manager.
So, in this hypothetical scenario, basically, na-check out natin 4. So, that will lead me to conclude, boss, mukhang ikaw talaga ang employer ng taong to. So,
regular na siya. Ganun.
No, I'm not saying regular. All I'm saying is, empleyado mo siya. There is
a relationship.
An employer-employee relationship. So, kung mapapansin ninyo dito sa 4 na to, saan binanggit yung employment contract? Wala. So, it was never a requirement for an employer-employee relationship to exist. It's a good piece of evidence, or it's a good indicator. However, legally speaking, it's still the fourfold test that we defer to establish the employer-employee relationship. And that shows me and us, basically, that facts and actual conditions matter more than the paper.
So, parang ano yan, I think it's also a principle in law. At least in the Philippines, we adhere to the substance over form na principle. Diba? So parang ganyan din, attorney, no? It's not, we're not just looking at the paper, we have to look at the substance of the relationship. Tama ba?
So wag po kayo mag-aalala. If you guys are worried na, walang binigay na papel sa akin, a piece of paper is not a requirement for you to be considered an employee. Okay, great. So malinaw yun.
Clear.
It needs to be clear, because kung hindi clear sa inyo yan, you won't be able to understand the succeeding points. Okay? Which leads me to point number 2.
Okay.
So kung sakaling nahirapan kayong intindihin yun, just go back, rewind. But, ito na, dun sa mga ready, let's go to point number 2.
I'm ready.
And that is, what happens when you go without a contract? So, let's tackle both sides, both from the employer and the employee side.
Okay.
Unahin ko na muna yung employee.
Okay.
So, yung ibang employee, basically, they try to utilize it to fit the ending that they want.
Okay.
There are some people who ask on our site na, Tony, hindi naman ako inisyuhan ng kontrata eh. Baka naman pwedeng hindi na ako mag 30 days turnover period. Aalis na lang ako. Anyway, wala naman binigay na papel.
Walang penalty doon. Wala kasing kontrata.
Right. Diba? Or yung employer naman. Attorney, hindi ko naman inisyuhan ng employment contract.
Walang contract talaga yan. Yan.
Pwede bang hindi ko muna bayaran ng SSS PhilHealth every week?
Naku!
Or pwede bang tanggalin ko na lang kagad to? Anyway, wala naman siyang papel na pinangahawakan. Empleyado siya.
Naku.
So, guys, here's what you need to understand. Going back to point number 1, the piece of paper is not the determinant to say na may employer-employee relationship. That being said, if you continue working without a contract, under the law, it's as if there is an employer-employee relationship anyway.
Okay.
So, hindi po excuse na walang papel to do all of those 2 things which I mentioned. So, for the employees, guys, kahit walang papel, you are still obligated to do the turnover period. Kasi nga, employed naman kayo as far as the law is concerned. And for the employer, guys, it's not an excuse to circumvent or skip a few of our labor laws. Na tipong, wala namang papel, wag na natin bigyan ng benefits or right pay, or tanggalin na lang natin yan kasi hindi naman nabigyan ng papel. Wag. You still have to go through due process.
Yes, please.
Okay? So, I hope that's very clear. So, just to recap, what happens when you go without a contract? The employee is considered employed anyway. So, it's not an excuse for any of those things that people ask us about.
Clear.
Now, Attorney Erwin, Attorney Ramon, hindi naman pala required ng contract.
Okay.
Eh di, what's the use? Hindi ko na lang gagawin. Di ba? Ba't pa ako magpapagod na mag-issue niya?
Or magbabayad pa ako ng attorney para gumawa ng contract.
Oo
na.
nga. Dagdag trabaho lang
Dagdag
yan.
trabaho, dagdag gastos.
Okay, so here's our position. Our position is even if it's not required, we still highly recommend issuing an employment contract. And why is that? The reason is if you don't issue an employment contract, it's a missed opportunity for the employer. And not just one opportunity. The employer will be missing 3 big opportunities. No, I think 4. 4 big opportunities.
Dami nun, Attorney Erwin.
Oo. Sayang naman. Ayoko kasing at the end sasabihin ninyo sayang naman, di ba? Ayun. So, you might be thinking, ano naman yung 4 opportunities na na-miss ng employer? Opportunity number 1 is the opportunity to invoke exceptions.
Exceptions? Why are there exceptions, Attorney Erwin?
Okay. Ano ba yung general rule kapag nag-hire ka ng tao? The general rule is regular employee yan.
Yes.
Through thick and thin, tao mo yan, di ba?
Yes.
Now, regular employment, think of it as the general rule. What are the exceptions? Basically, liliko ka from the general rule. Exception is the other employment statuses na available, such as like, probationary. Or hinire ka pala for project employment lang. Or, casual lang pala.
Casual.
Or, ito, habang nagtatanim lang tayo, seasonal. Di ba? So, those are the exceptions. And for you to be able to say that, itong employee to, probationary ka pa. You need paperwork to prove that. Kasi kung kunwari, probationary, one of the requirements is it should be stated clearly on the contract that it is probationary employment. Kasi otherwise, how do you prove the probationary siya pumasok? Otherwise, diretsong regular yun.
So, kung walang probationary contract or these other kinds, like casual contract or seasonal or whatever,
especially sa
regular ang bagsak.
Oo eh. Kunwari project.
Okay.
How do you attach an employee's employment to a project? It's through the issuance of a project employment contract. Kung wala kang ang papel, how do you say na, hindi, terminated na yung employment mo kasi tapos na tong project? Anong basis mo? Wala ka man lang project employment contract. So are you guys seeing the benefit? Kung may employment contract ka, you're able to put the employee on the exceptions, di ba? So general rule, regular employment, ayaw mong regular employment, dapat may papel ka.
That's actually a very, very big missed opportunity if they don't have a contract. Lalo na kung you have these kinds of employees. No?
True.
These special employees.
Let's go to the second missed opportunity, and that's the opportunity to impose restrictions.
Bakit may restrictions?
So, kunwari, you want to be able to control yung mga pwedeng gawin ng employee. So for instance, kung sakaling yung employee nag-work for you, binigyan mo ng mga proprietary techniques or secrets, recipes, and then you don't want them working for a competitor after they get employed with you for a certain period of time. That's what you call a non-compete.
Kasi baka gamitin nila yung secrets na yun.
Hindi baka, malamang gagamitin yun. Okay. So where do you put that? That's usually put inside the employment contract. It's one of the provisions. Kung wala kang papel, saan mo ilalagay yun? Diba? So you miss that opportunity to put proper restrictions. Nice. Sayang naman. Let's go to the third missed opportunity, and that's the opportunity to set expectations. Now, ugaling Pinoy, ang daming inaabot ng kwentuhan, correct? Kwentuhan tayo dito, kwentuhan tayo dyan, maya-maya, hindi mo na napapansin, ang layo-layo na narating natin. Even with work settings, minsan ganyan, pinag-uusapan, sige, bala kitang i-hire kasi ganito yung gagawin, blah, 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 blah. Ang haba-haba na napag-usapan, sa dulo nakalimutan na lahat. So, kunwari, tumuloy yung tao, nagkwentuhan lang kayo. Tapos pagdating ng payslip, bakit ang liit ng natanggap ko? Nakalimutan niya, yun na napag-usapan.
Sino si SSS? Bakit sa kanya napupunta?
Tsaka itong si Beer. Si Beer. Oo.
WHT. Ano to?
So, guys, it's a missed opportunity to set expectations if you don't issue an employment contract. Kasi for most people, talking about it is fine, but looking at things in a written format, that is another opportunity to set expectations properly. Iba kasi yung napag-usapan, iba rin yung nakikita mo na, okay, so ito pala yung sweldo ko. Ito pala yung neto na makukuha. Ito yung scope of responsibilities.
Yeah.
Ito yung salary.
And it's also helpful that it's already on paper. Kasi what if the person nakausap initially about yung benefits or whatever ng employee, wala na or nag-resign na?
Sino
how do you track? Oh, yeah. So how do you track that? Or how does the person na pumalit continue that? Kailangan may reference sila. Right?
Of course. So what are the things to set as expectations on the paper? Here are some suggestions. What the position will be within the company. Oh, cook pala. Akala ko chef ang binibigay sa akin. Di ba? At least simula pa lang nagkalinawang kayo. Scope of responsibilities. Hugas plato. Bakit may hugas plato rito? Akala ko chef position.
Or maitre d'.
Oo.
Hugas plato.
Salary and benefits. Sabi, may free meal ako dito every day. Bakit parang wala? So, that might be something that you guys need to talk about from the start. Prohibitions and restrictions. And possibly special limitations such as non-compete and non-disclosure. So, magandang lumabas yan dun sa paperwork.
Nice.
And so on and so forth. Baka may maisip pa kayo na gusto ninyong idagdag, di ba? Why not? Isama na lang natin.
Sky's the limit.
Yes.
The more, the merrier.
Now, let's talk about the fourth missed opportunity if ever hindi ka mag-issue ng contract. And the fourth one is the missed opportunity to document things properly. Okay. And when I say document, ma-document mo kailan ba nagsimula yung empleyado. Kailan siya naging regular. Kailan na-promote or whatever it is. Di ba? Sayang naman. Kasi if you documented everything from the start, napakadali ng buhay. Kunwari, magtanong ang HR, ilang taon na ba itong taong to sa atin? Bukas ka lang ng 201 file. Okay, ito. September 15, 2015. Malinaw. Hindi yung parang, basta matagal na yan dito. Nung bago pinarenovate yung annex.
Kailan ba yun? 2014 yun eh.
Diba? Iaasa mo kung kailan bago ni-renovate yung building para malaman kung kailan pumasok yung tauhan nyo. I don't think that's how a professional business is run. So, Attorney Erwin, Attorney Ramon, yung pag-alam ng reference, that's nice to know, pero may effect ba yan legally? Meron, malaki. Paano kung magko-compete ka ng separation pay? You don't want to overpay.
Yes.
And you don't want to underpay.
And yes, definitely.
Diba? Or kung kunwari, pinag-uusapan seniority. Kunwari, may ipopromote. Seniority is one of the things that you guys are looking at. O sino nga ba nauna sa kanila? Kasi parang within a few months lang yan dalawang candidates for promotion pumasok. Sino ba ang uunahin natin sa kanila? 201 file ang bagsak. So, do not miss the opportunity to document the important details of an employee's life. They're milestones within your company. Okay. So, those are the four. Ano uli yung four? Missed opportunity to invoke exceptions.
Yes.
Diba, para kung ayaw mo ng regular employment status kagad, o at least kaya mong ilagay sa isa sa mga yon. Number 2 is to opportunity to impose restrictions. Next is opportunity to clarify expectations. And finally, the opportunity to document.
Nice.
Okay. Now, having said all of this, Attorney Erwin, Attorney Ramon, convinced na ako talagang importante pala yung
employment contract.
However, bago pa ako pumasok dito, may mga nauna ng empleyado na nag-work na pero never nabigyan ng kontrata. Pwede ko pa bang i-correct yun? And the answer is yes, pwede. How do you do that? Okay, let's give you guys some power tips. Basically, parang advanced advanced tips na to. Okay, so assuming kunwari ikaw kunwari yung nagtatrabaho na here in the company for the last 3 years.
Ako si Boyet.
Si Boyet. Sige. And then ako naman yung bisor mo.
Okay.
So, napanood ko tong episode na to. Sabi, ang gagaling talaga ni Attorney Erwin, Attorney Ramon.
Oh, galing!
Gusto ko talaga ng advice nila. So, kahit na walang employment contract ng mga taong inabutan ko, gusto kong gawaan. Paano ba yon? Okay, so you draft an employment contract as if bagong pasok pa lang si Boyet.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing. You need to be able to preserve the information that is favorable to Boyet.
Bakit? Why do I need to do that, Attorney?
Okay, let me answer that through an example. So, ikaw 3 years na nag-work, di ba?
3 years na po.
3 years na. So, kung ako gagawa ng employment contract ngayon at this date, kung papapirmahan ko sa'yo on this date, kawawa ka naman kasi tapon yung 3 taon mo.
Ay, hindi ako papayag niyan, sir.
Exactly.
Oh.
For purposes of separation pay, di ba, or retirement, sayang, malaking bagay yung 3 taon.
Oo, sir. May loyalty award pa. Oh.
Di ba? So, for me, if I were to create a contract right now, I will take into account na hindi dapat ngayon yung date.
Dapat.
It should be yung date kung kailan talaga siya pumasok. That way, his rights are preserved.
Okay, you have to preserve my rights, sir.
Oo. In addition, yung position, siguro you can document it na pumasok siya as dishwasher, and then na-promote to cook, and then eventually naging chef.
Manager na ako ngayon.
Oo, and then manager. You can document that in the piece of paper. So basically, pwede po mag-issue kahit na late ng paper as long as the rights and the information of the employee are preserved. Now, pag pinresent yan, usually from experience, may resistance po ang mga empleyado. Ano ba yung pinapapirma mong yan? Blah, blah, blah. Laging defense mechanism, are you trying to put one over me? So you might encounter that, especially kapag bago kang HR, bago kang manager, tas sila ang tagal-tagal na doon, biglang papa-issuehan mo ng papel. You might encounter resistance. Now, I have some tips on how to overcome this resistance. Number 1, paliwanag lang po na maayos. Boyet, actually, pinapil ko lang yung sitwasyon na nangyayari naman over the last 3 years. Basically, walang binago sa employment mo. Ito, kung mapapansin mo, yung start date, kung kailan yung totoong start date mo, nilalagay ko lang sa papel because this one will be able to document it properly. And pati ikaw, kung sakaling mag-computan tayo ng separation pay, may pwede kang ipakita na maayos na papel.
Well, kung ganyan mo kaayos in-explain, Attorney, baka pumayag ako.
Now, kahit na in-explain mo na maayos, merong matitigas.
Meron pa rin.
So in that case, ito ang recommended ko. Sige po sir, ipapaiwan ko po yung kopya. Kung gusto nyo po, kumonsulta kayo ng abogado of your own choosing.
Kukonsulta po talaga ako kasi parang merong ginagawa kayong mali dyan .
No problem po. Maghihintay po ako. Once na pinangkonsulta nyo na po sa pinagkakatiwalaan ninyo, wala pong problema. Balik nyo po sa akin para mailagay natin sa 201 file.
Sige, akin na yan.
Okay. Ngayon, merong mga talagang sobrang tigas. Binigay mo na. Ayaw talaga. Anong worst case scenario or fallback position ko? I would probably issue a memo. I-attach ko na lang yan. Mr. Boyet, actually, tinry kong papirmahan sa'yo to just to memorialize yung stay mo rito, kailan ka nag-start, blah, 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 blah. I'm issuing you this memo to send you a copy. Ngayon, what's the purpose of that memo? Para lang may justification ako na may ipasok ko naman sa 201 file na. So, kahit di niya pirmahan, for me, it might not matter that much kasi pabor naman sa kanya yun.
Okay.
So, it would have been nicer kung sakali may pirma na lang. Diba? Pero kung talagang matigas, ako naman, fallback position para lang may paperwork ako. Na kahit ako umalis, yung papalit sa akin, hindi maguguluhan when dealing with the employees. Kasi may record sila. Hopefully, magaling kayo magpaliwanag enough that they feel safe signing that. But again, it's a worst case scenario. Okay? So, Attorney Ramon, let's do a recap very quick of everything that we've talked about.
Yeah, well, sige, Attorney Erwin, we talked about a lot of stuff today. No? So, talking about employment contracts. So, the first thing we talked about is it required? Is an employment contract required to be considered an employee? And our answer is no. Okay? What prevails is what we call the fourfold test. Okay? So, ano nga yan, Attorney Erwin? Hire, pay, control, and fire.
Yes.
Very good. Next thing we talked about is what happens if there is no contract. So, ano nang floating na ba yung employee or what? No, and our answer is employee siya. Okay, because like we said, we look at the fourfold test, no, regardless of whether or not may contract. Okay. The third thing we talked about is employment contracts or not having employment contracts are missed opportunities for the employer.
Apat yan.
Apat din yan, no?
Mhm.
So, yung mga pinag-usapan kanina, like invoking your exceptions to yung status ng employee, imposing restrictions, and the opportunity to document as well, no?
Hindi, may pang-apat pa.
To clarify.
Yes.
Tama.
Oh.
Ayun. And the fourth thing we talked about is what happens if we were not able to issue an employment contract and these employees have been here for 4 or 5 years or even more. We can issue an employment contract even if it's late. And then we just have to deal with explaining it to them properly
and ensure that their rights are protected.
Yes.
Wala po tayong babaguhin. It's just the documentation of what's already happening.
Yun.
That's the key thing there. Protect their rights.
So tama ba, Tony?
Yes. Good job. For most of you, this lesson was more than enough, and if it makes your life easier, then great. But there are some of you who will watch and end up asking more questions, such as, Attorney, what format should the probationary contract be? Or, Attorney, what are the important provisions that I should include in my probationary contract? Or, Attorney, what information should you ask the employee to include when filling it out? If that's you, then I invite you to check out our online course titled How to Draft a Probationary Contract. You can go to info.legalguide.ph/probationary for more information.
Now, to add to that, if you want us to tackle your question in our show, go to www.legalguide.ph and click the Submit Topic button. Next, of course, we'd like to know what's your biggest takeaway from today's video. So please, write it down in the comments and let's talk about it. Lastly, if you feel we've earned a good rating, please give us a like and subscribe because it gives us feedback that we're doing a good job and it encourages us to do more videos.
One last thing. Running a business is hard and we need to cover all bases. One area which you can change, which will have positive effects throughout the employee's lifetime with your company, is the employment contract. Start it off right and keep benefiting from that investment over and over again while the employee works with you. So wasn't that simple?
Now go make better choices.